So now that my space is set up and I have my reference photos chosen, it's time to think about composition and to make a value sketch. Starting with a value sketch is important. It helps guide you as you're painting, and you can get lost in the branches and the leaves, but if you have a value study to go back to, you'll remember, oh, here's where the shadow is, that's where the darker leaves are going to be, here's where the branches are, those are most trees going to be the darkest part. So it's nice to have that. A value study also helps you set up your composition before you start painting. You think about the white space, the negative space around it, and where you want to position your tree in the piece of paper that you have, thinking about the edges and how wide it's going to be, how tall. So going through a value study, a value sketch is really helpful. Okay, I have my sketchbook, and with my pencil, I've just drawn a smaller rectangle. This is about half the size of the final image, so 6 by 9, this is about 3 by 4.5. And that's just to make sure that when I'm thinking about composition, it's going to translate to my larger image. So I do have my reference photos here. This is the one with the shape. And so for right now with the value study, the composition, I'm going to think about the shape. And mostly I'm going to focus on this trunk. I really love that nice proud trunk. Now, when we're painting, we're not going to use very detailed drawing, and I'll show you the style and the method I'm using, but let's just get a sense for where we want it to go on the page. And I'm not going to put the bottom of the tree down here at the bottom. I'm going to leave it here in the middle. So just a very small general idea. Now remember, this is just a value study, so this is not the final sketch. I'm just getting in the shape of these big branches here at the bottom, and then the smaller branches as we go up are just going to be dictated by the shape of the painting. Okay, so those are the big branches I'm sort of hanging the composition on, and then the leaves are just going to be around in this space here. So I just wanted to get a shape for the tree. Cherry trees tend to be a little bit wider than they are tall, so that is part of what makes them so lovely and such a unique shape. So that's just generally, we'll probably do a little shadow or something underneath. Okay, that's very, very, very simple. And now I'm going to show you with the composition how we're going to do the value sketch. Now, just a few words about composition. There is a general rule of 3 when the eye is drawn towards these intersections of 3, and things that are in the middle tend to not be as attractive. However, every rule is made to be broken. So we are definitely breaking that rule by putting our focal point, the thing you want your eye to go to, in the middle of the composition. And because this is all going to be white space around it, this is almost more of a graphic design than it would be true landscape. So just something to think about. Okay, so the way I'm going to get started, I use cobalt blue, and I'm making a little puddle with the damp brush and just dabbing into the cobalt, making a little puddle here. I use cobalt because it's a medium hue and I can go lighter and darker depending on the thickness of the paint. So I'll start with a nice puddle here. The consistency of the paint matters a ton, but this is just a value sketch. I'm not going to worry too much about it. So I'll start with my darkest dark. That's really going to be the branches here. And this is going to be a very simple value sketch because there's really just going to be a few shades here. So there is the branches, and again, the shapes of the branches are just as a guide. When we get going in painting, you're going to be able to change and add as you like. Okay, so those are the branches. I'm rinsing off my brush, dabbing it a little bit dry, just a tad more plain water, and I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint and just pick up some of the paint that's there for the branches as the leaves. Now, cherry blossoms are quite light, and so they're not going to be dark. They're not going to be like a rich maple or dark green oak leaf. But even having said that, remember the sun is coming from up here. I sometimes like to make a direction for myself, a directional arrow where the sun is coming from, and that's really helpful. I'm going to just dab the edge here because if the sun is coming from this side, then this side of the tree is going to be more in shadow. And if the sun is coming from this side, then the underneath of everything is going to be a little darker. So something to remember about watercolors is that it has to dry. If I were to add more color right here, right now, it's just going to spread. So I'm going to wait for this to dry. And we'll come back and I can add in some darker darks where I want them to be. Okay, so it's dried a little bit, and now with a little bit of a thicker paint, I'm going to be able to add in a much darker color, and I'm just going to add it to one side of the branch. It's still spreading a little. It's not quite totally dry, but that's fine. Again, this is just my value study. The underside of the branches and the side away from the sun are going to have the darker colors, the darker shadow, I'm sorry. So I'm just sort of putting those in there. Again, this is going to, along with my reference, remind me of what I'm doing. And now using the other image I have, so that gives me the shape of the tree and the composition. The other image I have, which shows the colors, and if you'll notice, there's light at the top and then a darker underneath. So I'm going to try to mimic that through this value study by keeping the lighter parts of the blossoms that are facing up towards the sun, and then some darker areas that would be underneath in the shadow. So not so precise. I'm going outside of my drawing here too, based on the image. But again, this is just a sketch. This is just a value study for me as I'm working to remember, oh, that's right, the shadow side's here, the sun side's here. Okay, and I did say that I was going to add sort of a base. Otherwise, this does look like it's floating in space. And I'm just going to do a bit of a shadow. The shadow would be under the tree. If the light's coming from this direction, that heavier shadow is going to be here. So just with a, while this is still damp, just a damp brush, just make a quick mark there. And that just gives us an idea that the tree is sitting on something. So this is all I'm going to do for my value study. I'm going to stop right here and use this along with my reference photos to get started on the real painting.